The hammer slipped from Violet Ashford's blistered hands for the third time that morning, and she knew if her employer saw it happen again, she would lose another day's wages. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly on the barren stretch of fence line outside San Antonio in the summer of 1876, turning the metal tools scorching hot and making every breath feel like inhaling fire. She was 22 years old and felt ancient, her back permanently curved from years of manual labor, her hands calloused and scarred, her spirit worn down to almost nothing by men who saw her as less than human. Violet had been mending fences for nearly 5 years now, ever since her father died and left her with nothing but debts and a reputation for being strong enough to do a man's work. The ranchers who hired her paid her half what they would pay a man, worked her twice as hard, and treated her with a cruelty that seemed to bring them pleasure. She had learned to keep her head down, her mouth shut, and her expectations lower than the dust beneath her worn boots. The Hendersons, her current employers, were among the worst. Marcus Henderson had a mean streak that ran deep, and his wife Clara seemed to enjoy watching Violet struggle. They would withhold water during the hottest part of the day, claiming she had not earned it yet. They would inspect her work with magnifying attention, finding fault where none existed just to dock her pay. And they spoke to her like she was something they had scraped off their boots, their voices dripping with disdain and mockery. Violet picked up the hammer again, ignoring the fresh blister that had burst open on her palm. Blood mixed with dirt as she gripped the handle and drove another nail into the weathered fence post. The wood was so old and dry it kept splitting, making the work twice as difficult. She had tried to tell Marcus Henderson that morning that they needed new posts, but he had laughed in her face and told her that if she could not work with what she had, there were plenty of other desperate fools who would take her place. The fence stretched for miles across the Henderson property, and Violet had been working on it alone for 3 weeks. Her body ached in places she had not known could ache. She slept in a tiny shed behind the main house, on a pile of moldy hay that made her cough through the night. They fed her scraps from their table, usually cold and sometimes spoiled, and acted like they were being generous, but she had nowhere else to go. No family, no friends, no prospects beyond this endless cycle of cruel employers and backbreaking work. She had tried to save money, had dreamed of buying a small piece of land somewhere and building a life of her own, but there was never anything left after she paid for her few necessities. The dream had faded over the years, replaced by a dull resignation that this was simply her lot in life. A rider appeared on the horizon just after noon, and Violet paused in her work to watch him approach. The Henderson ranch did not get many visitors, and she felt a flutter of curiosity despite her exhaustion. The man sat tall in his saddle, his movements easy and confident. As he drew closer, she could see he was younger than she had expected, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a face that spoke of both strength and kindness. He reined in his horse near where she was working, tipping his hat to her with a courtesy that caught her off guard. Most men did not acknowledge her at all, and those who did usually looked at her with either pity or contempt. "Afternoon," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "I am looking for Marcus Henderson. Would he be up at the main house?" Violet nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look, covered in dust and sweat and blood. "Yes, sir, he should be there." The man studied her for a moment, his dark eyes taking in her torn dress, her blistered hands, the way she swayed slightly on her feet from exhaustion and hunger. Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite name. "That fence is never going to hold with posts that rotten," he said quietly. "You need new timber." "I know," Violet replied, then caught herself. She should not be agreeing, should not be speaking to a stranger about her employer's business. I mean, I just work here. I do what I am told. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. How long have you been out here today? Since dawn. Have you eaten? The question was so unexpected that Violet did not know how to answer. She stared at him, wondering if this was some kind of test, if Marcus Henderson had sent this man to try to catch her complaining. I am fine, she said finally, turning back to her work. She heard him dismount, heard his boots hit the ground, but she kept her eyes on the fence. Her hands were shaking now, whether from hunger or nerves she could not tell. My name is Xavier Ironwood, the man said from much closer than she had expected. I own a ranch about 20 miles west of here, near Concordia. I came to see if Henderson wanted to sell some of his breeding stock, but I can see he has other priorities. Violet said nothing. She positioned another nail and swung the hammer, missing completely as a wave of dizziness swept over her. She staggered, and suddenly Xavier's hands were on her shoulders, steadying her. When did you last eat a real meal? He demanded, and there was anger in his voice now, though she sensed it was not directed at her. I eat, she said defensively, pulling away from his touch. The brief contact had been so startling, so unexpectedly gentle that it made her chest hurt. That was not what I asked. Before Violet could respond, Marcus Henderson's voice rang out from the direction of the main house. Violet, what in blazes are you doing standing around? I do not pay you to chat with visitors. Xavier turned slowly to face the approaching rancher, and Violet saw something dangerous flash in his eyes. But when he spoke, his voice was perfectly controlled. Mr. Henderson, I presume. Xavier Ironwood. I sent word I would be coming by today to discuss purchasing some cattle. Marcus Henderson's demeanor changed instantly, a greasy smile spreading across his face. Mr. Ironwood, yes, of course, I got your message. Please do not mind the girl. She is just hired help, lazy as they come. Has to be watched every minute or she will slack off. He shot Violet a poisonous look. Get back to work. Violet ducked her head and returned to the fence, but she could feel Xavier's eyes on her. She heard the two men walk toward the house, heard Henderson's obsequious chatter as he tried to curry favor with a potential buyer. She told herself it did not matter, that she had encountered brief kindness before, and it never amounted to anything. In her world, people like Xavier Ironwood came and went, while people like her just kept working until their bodies gave out. But something about the encounter stayed with her through the long afternoon. The way he had looked at her, really looked at her, like she was a person rather than a piece of property. The genuine concern in his voice, the anger on her behalf. It had been so long since anyone had shown her basic human decency that she had almost forgotten what it felt like. The sun was beginning to set when Xavier emerged from the house alone, Marcus Henderson notably absent. He walked directly to where Violet was finishing the last section of fence, moving with purpose. How much does Henderson pay you? He asked without preamble. Violet's throat went dry. I do not think I should. How much? $5 a month, she whispered. And room and board. Xavier's face darkened. Room and board. That shed behind the house where I saw a rat the size of a cat. That is your room. She did not answer, which was answer enough. I am leaving now, Xavier said. I did not buy any cattle from Henderson because I do not do business with men like him, but I want to make you an offer, and I need you to listen carefully. Violet's heart began to pound. She had heard of men making offers to desperate women before, had narrowly avoided such situations herself through sheer luck and paranoia. Xavier seemed to read her thoughts because he held up his hands. Not that kind of offer. I need someone who knows fencing. My ranch is bigger than I can manage alone, and I have been looking for help for months. I will pay you $30 a month, provide a real room in the bunkhouse with a proper bed, and you will eat the same food I eat, 3 meals a day. The work will still be hard because ranching is hard, but I will never ask you to do anything I would not do myself, and I will treat you with respect. Violet felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back fiercely. Why? She managed to ask. You do not know me. I could be everything Henderson says I am. Lazy, worthless. You have been working in 100-degree heat for hours with barely any water and probably no food, on a job that would challenge a man twice your size, and you have not quit, Xavier said firmly. That is not lazy. That is not worthless. That is someone with more strength than most people will ever have, and no one deserves to be treated the way Henderson treats you. He will not let me go, Violet said, even as hope began to bloom painfully in her chest. I owe him for room and board, for tools he says I damaged. How much? $47. Xavier reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. He counted out bills, then added an extra 20. You will give him 47 and tell him you are done. The extra 20 is for you, for anything you might need for the journey to my ranch. We will leave tonight. Pack whatever belongings you have. Violet stared at the money he held out to her. It was more cash than she had held in her entire life. I cannot accept this. I cannot pay you back. If the job does not work out, the job will work out, Xavier said with quiet confidence. I am a good judge of character, and I know determination when I see it. You do not owe me anything beyond honest work, which I believe you will give. Now take the money before Henderson comes out here and makes this difficult. With shaking hands, Violet took the bills. They felt impossibly crisp and real against her damaged palms. Why are you doing this? She asked again, needing to understand. Xavier was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was softer. My mother worked as a washerwoman after my father died. She was treated the way you are treated. She wore herself down to nothing while men profited from her labor and gave nothing back. By the time I was old enough to help her, it was too late. She died tired and broken and convinced she had no value. I swore then that if I ever had the means, I would never stand by and watch someone else suffer the same way. I have the means now. Let me help you. The tears came then, silent and hot, tracking through the dust on Violet's face. She could not remember the last time she had cried, had thought herself too dried up inside for tears. But Xavier's words had cracked something open in her chest, some protected place where she had locked away all the pain and humiliation, and desperate longing for things to be different. I will work hard, she promised, her voice breaking. I will earn every cent. I will not disappoint you. I know, Xavier said simply. He gave her a small smile, the first real smile anyone had directed at her in longer than she could remember. Go settle things with Henderson. I will wait here with the horses. If he gives you any trouble, you call for me. Understand? Violet nodded and made her way to the main house on unsteady legs. Her whole body felt strange, almost numb with shock. This could not be real. Things like this did not happen to women like her. But the money in her pocket was real, and so was the steady presence of Xavier Ironwood waiting by the fence. Marcus Henderson was in his office, tallying figures in a ledger. He looked up with annoyance when Violet knocked on the doorframe. What do you want? You should be finished with that fence by now. I am quitting, Violet said, and was amazed at how steady her voice came out. I have what I owe you for room and board. She stepped forward and placed $47 on his desk. Henderson's eyes widened, then narrowed with suspicion and anger. Quitting? You cannot quit. You are under contract. There is no contract, Violet said. You never gave me anything in writing. I have paid my debts. I am leaving. Like hell you are. Henderson surged to his feet. "You ungrateful little witch. I gave you a chance when no one else would. I fed you, gave you a roof. You gave me moldy hay in a rat-infested shed and table scraps," Violet interrupted, and felt a fierce satisfaction at the shock on his face. She had never talked back before, had never dared. "You paid me starvation wages and treated me like I was less than nothing. I owe you nothing but what I have given you, and now I am done." Henderson moved around the desk with alarming speed, his hand raised. Violet flinched backward, but before he could reach her, Xavier filled the doorway. "I would not do that if I were you," he said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. Henderson stopped, his face purple with rage. "This is none of your business, Ironwood. The girl works for me. Not anymore, she does not." Xavier stepped into the room, positioning himself between Violet and her former employer. "She has paid what she owes. She is free to go. If you try to stop her, we will have a problem." For a long moment, Henderson looked like he might argue, might even try to fight. But something in Xavier's stance and the calm certainty of his words made him think better of it. He stepped back, breathing hard. "Fine," he spat. "Take the worthless creature. You will regret it. She is more trouble than she is worth." "I doubt that," Xavier said. He turned to Violet. "Get your things. I will wait right here." Violet hurried to the shed, her heart pounding so hard she felt dizzy. She owned almost nothing, so it took less than a minute to gather her few possessions. A spare dress with more patches than original fabric, a thin blanket, a tin cup, and a small wooden horse her father had carved for her when she was a child. Everything fit into a worn cloth bag. When she emerged, Xavier was still standing in the doorway of the office, making sure Henderson did not follow. He nodded when he saw her and led the way to where his horses waited. He had two, she realized, a sturdy bay gelding he had been riding and a gentle-looking chestnut mare. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Not well," Violet admitted. "I have not been on a horse in years." "The mare is steady. Her name is Clover. Just hold on to the saddle horn if you need to. We will go slow." He helped her mount, his hands respectful and careful, and Violet felt the strangeness of it all over again. She was leaving. She was actually leaving the Henderson ranch, leaving behind the cruelty and hunger and endless, crushing labor. She was going somewhere new with a man she had met just hours ago, a man who had shown her more kindness in an afternoon than she had experienced in years. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. They rode away from the ranch as the last light faded from the sky. Violet looked back once and saw Marcus Henderson standing on his porch, watching them go with an expression of impotent fury. Then Xavier guided them around a bend in the road, and the ranch disappeared from view. "We will camp tonight and reach my place by tomorrow afternoon," Xavier said. "There is a good spot about an hour from here with water and cover. How are you doing?" "I am fine," Violet said automatically, then caught herself. She was not fine. She was exhausted and overwhelmed and still half convinced this was some kind of dream. "Actually, I am terrified," she admitted. "I do not know why you are being kind to me. I do not know what you expect. I do not know if I can really do the work you need, or if I will be any use to you at all." Xavier was quiet for a moment as their horses walked side by side through the gathering darkness. "I expect honest work and honest company," he said finally. "Nothing more, nothing less. And I think you will be more than capable once you have some decent food in you and time to recover from how Henderson treated you. You do not have to be afraid, Violet. I keep my word. You will be safe at my ranch." The way he said her name, with simple respect rather than the contempt she was used to, made her throat tight. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and Violet felt some of the tension begin to drain from her shoulders. The night air was cooler than the brutal day had been, and the rhythmic movement of the horse beneath her was almost soothing. She had not felt this close to peaceful in longer than she could remember. True to his word, Xavier led them to a small clearing near a creek. He helped her dismount, and she was grateful because her legs felt like water after the ride. While she stood awkwardly to the side, unsure of what to do, he efficiently set up camp, building a small fire and unpacking supplies from his saddlebags. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a fallen log near the fire. "Rest." Violet sat, watching as he worked. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had done these tasks countless times, and there was something mesmerizing about it. He pulled out a small pot and filled it with water from the creek, then added coffee grounds and set it over the fire. Next came dried beef, beans, and hardtack, simple trail food but more than Violet usually saw in a day. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, partly because she was curious and partly because the silence was making her too aware of how strange this situation was. Xavier settled across the fire from her, feeding more sticks into the flames. "It is about 500 acres, mostly grazing land. I have been building the herd for 3 years now, and I have about 200 head of cattle. There is a decent house, not fancy but solid, a barn and a bunkhouse that needs some work. I grow some vegetables, keep chickens. It is a lot for one person to manage, which is why I need help." "You have been running it alone for 3 years?" Violet asked, surprised. "Mostly. I hire temporary hands during roundup and branding, but I have not found anyone I wanted to keep on permanently. It is hard to find people you can trust, people who will work with you instead of just putting in time for a paycheck. How old are you, if you do not mind my asking?" 26, Xavier said. "I bought the land with money I saved working as a drover. Spent 5 years taking cattle north to Kansas. Saved every penny I could and bought the ranch when I was 23. It has been hard work but worth it. The place is mine, all mine, and there is something powerful about that." Violet understood exactly what he meant. The dream of having something that belonged to her, something no one could take away, had driven her through the worst of times. Hearing that Xavier had achieved that dream gave her a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could too. "What about you?" Xavier asked. "How did you end up mending fences for people like Henderson?" Violet stared into the fire, watching the flames dance. It was not a story she enjoyed telling, but something about the night and the distance from her old life made it easier. "My father was a farmer, had a small place outside San Antonio. When I was 17, a drought hit and destroyed everything. He borrowed money to get through it, but the next year was just as bad. When he died, the debts came to me. I sold everything to pay them, but it was not enough. I started taking whatever work I could find, and that meant the kind of work most women will not do. Heavy labor, dangerous jobs. The men who hire women for that kind of work, they know we are desperate, so they pay less and treat us however they want. For 5 years you have been doing this." "Yes, alone, alone." Xavier shook his head slowly. "That takes a kind of courage most people do not have. You should be proud of that." Violet had never thought of it as courage. It had just been survival, doing what had to be done because the alternative was worse. But hearing Xavier frame it differently made her see her own story through new eyes. The coffee finished brewing, and Xavier poured them each a cup in battered tin mugs. Then he divided the food, giving Violet the larger portion. She wanted to protest, but found she was too hungry. She ate slowly, making herself chew carefully so she would not get sick. The food was simple but tasted like luxury after months of Henderson's scraps. Xavier watched her with an expression that held both sadness and determination. "Things will be different now," he said quietly. "I promise you that." They finished eating in silence, and then Xavier showed her where she could sleep. He had a bedroll and blankets, and he insisted she take them while he slept by the fire with just his jacket for warmth. Violet tried to argue, but he was immovable. "You need rest more than I do," he said firmly. "Take the bedroll. That is not a request, that is your employer telling you to take care of yourself so you can work tomorrow." Despite everything, Violet smiled. It was the first real smile she had managed in she could not remember how long. "When you put it that way." She settled into the bedroll, and it was so much more comfortable than the hay pile she was used to that she almost cried again. Xavier banked the fire and settled against a tree, his rifle across his lap. Violet realized he was keeping watch, protecting her, and the knowledge made her feel something she had not felt in 5 years. Safe. She fell asleep watching the stars through the tree branches, hearing the gentle sounds of the horses and the creek. And for the first time in a very long time, she did not have nightmares. When Violet woke, the sun was already well up, and she panicked for a moment, thinking she had overslept and would be punished. Then she remembered where she was, remembered yesterday had really happened, and relief flooded through her. Xavier was brewing more coffee, and he smiled when he saw her sit up. "Morning. How do you feel?" "Better," Violet said, and realized it was true. Her body still ached, but the deep, bone-grinding exhaustion had eased slightly. "I am sorry I slept so late." "It is barely past dawn," Xavier said. "And you needed the rest. We have a few hours of riding ahead of us, so eat something and take your time. The ranch is not going anywhere." They had a simple breakfast of leftover beans and hardtack, then broke camp and continued their journey. The landscape gradually changed as they rode, becoming greener and more lush. Xavier pointed out landmarks and told her about the area, his voice filled with genuine love for this land. "That is the creek that runs through my property," he said, gesturing to a ribbon of water visible in the distance. "It never dries up, even in bad years. That was one of the main reasons I chose this spot. Good water means good grazing, and good grazing means healthy cattle." As they drew closer, Violet could see the ranch itself taking shape on the horizon. There was a wooden house, weathered but sturdy looking, with a covered porch. Near it stood a large barn, a smaller structure that must be the bunkhouse, and various corrals and pens. Cattle dotted the grassland, grazing peacefully. It was beautiful in a simple, practical way, and Violet felt her chest tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. This was a real home, built by someone who cared about it. It radiated a sense of permanence and peace that was completely foreign to her. "Welcome to Ironwood Ranch," Xavier said, and there was pride in his voice. "Your new home." Those words hit Violet harder than she expected. Home. She had not had a home since her father died, just places she worked and slept until she moved on to the next one. The idea that this could be different, that this could really be a home, was almost too much to hope for. They rode up to the barn, and Xavier dismounted first, then helped Violet down. Her legs were stiff from the long ride, and she stumbled slightly. His hand steadied her again, and she was acutely aware of how gentle his touch was, how careful. "Let me show you around," he said. Xavier walked her through the property, pointing out each building and explaining what it was used for. The barn was well organized, with stalls for horses, space for equipment, and a hayloft overhead. The chicken coop was sturdily built and currently housing about a dozen hens and a rooster. The vegetable garden behind the house was flourishing despite the summer heat, rows of beans, squash, tomatoes, and peppers showing his skill as a gardener. Finally, they reached the bunkhouse. It was a simple rectangular building with a wooden floor and 4 narrow beds along the walls. Windows on either side let in plenty of light, and the whole space felt clean and well maintained. You can have your pick of beds, Xavier said. I will bring over some extra blankets and pillows from the house. There is a wash basin there by the door, and the outhouse is just behind the bunkhouse. I know it is not fancy, it is perfect, Violet interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. She walked to the nearest bed and touched the mattress wonderingly. It was a real bed with a real mattress, not moldy hay or bare ground. The room had solid walls and a roof that did not leak. It was clean and dry and more than she had dared hope for. This is more than perfect. Xavier looked relieved. Good. Why do not you get settled, wash up if you want, and then come up to the house when you are ready? I will make us some lunch, and we can talk about what work needs doing. After he left, Violet sank down on the bed she had claimed and let herself absorb the reality of her situation. She was at Ironwood Ranch. She had a real place to sleep, the promise of real food, and an employer who seemed to be a genuinely good man. It felt like a dream, like something that could be snatched away at any moment, but she could not afford to think that way. She needed to prove herself, needed to show Xavier that his faith in her was not misplaced. She would work harder than she ever had before, would earn her keep, and then some. She would not give him any reason to regret hiring her. Violet washed her face and hands in the basin, scrubbing away days of accumulated dirt and sweat. She changed into her spare dress, which was hardly better than the one she had been wearing, but at least was not covered in blood and dust. Then she made her way to the main house, her stomach fluttering with nervousness. Xavier was in the kitchen, a large room that took up most of the back of the house. A cast iron stove dominated one wall, and shelves lined with supplies filled another. There was a proper table with chairs, curtains on the windows, and a general air of comfort that spoke of a man who actually lived here rather than just existing. "Hope you like stew," Xavier said, stirring a pot on the stove. "I made extra yesterday, so it just needs heating up." "I like anything," Violet said honestly. "I am not picky." "You should be," Xavier said. "Everyone deserves to enjoy their food. One of the things I learned driving cattle was that a good meal at the end of a hard day makes everything more bearable. I am not a fancy cook, but I try to make things that taste decent." He ladled stew into 2 bowls, and the smell alone made Violet's mouth water. They sat at the table, and when she took her first bite, she had to suppress a moan. It was beef stew with carrots and potatoes and onions, seasoned with herbs and cooked until everything was tender and flavorful. It was the best thing she had tasted in 5 years. Xavier watched her with amusement. "I take it you approve." "This is incredible," Violet said. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother, and then out of necessity on the trail. Cowboys who cannot cook do not eat well, so I figured it out." He took a bite of his own stew. "Now, let me tell you what needs doing around here. The north pasture has about a mile of fence that needs repair or replacement. Some of the posts are rotten, some of the wire has snapped. That is going to be the biggest job, probably take a couple weeks of steady work. I have all the materials ready to go. I just have not had time to do it myself." "I can start tomorrow," Violet said immediately. "Actually, I was thinking you should rest tomorrow. Take a day to recover from Henderson's place, get your strength back." Violet shook her head. "With respect, I would rather work. I have been doing nothing but fence work for weeks. I know I can handle it, and I want to prove to you that hiring me was the right choice." Xavier studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but we will work together at least for the first few days. I want to make sure you have everything you need and that you are not pushing yourself too hard. You do not have to do that. I can work alone. I know I do not have to. I want to. Besides, 2 people working together will get it done faster, and there are other things I need to attend to once the fence is handled." They spent the rest of lunch discussing the work, and Violet felt herself relaxing into the conversation. Xavier listened to her ideas, asked her opinion on things, treated her like a partner rather than a servant. It was so different from what she was used to that it kept catching her off guard. After they ate, Xavier showed her where all the tools were stored and explained his system for organizing them. Everything had its place, and he was meticulous about maintenance. Tools are expensive, he explained. Taking care of them means they last longer and work better. I expect you to clean and put away anything you use. Of course, Violet said. That part made sense to her, was consistent with how she tried to work even when her employers did not care. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of information. Xavier showed her where the feed was stored, how much to give the horses and chickens, where the well was located, how to work the pump. He introduced her to each of his horses by name and personality. He walked her through the garden and told her what was ready to harvest and what was still growing. By the time the sun began to set, Violet's head was spinning with new information, but she also felt a growing excitement. This was a real ranch, a real operation, and she was going to be part of it. Not just a disposable worker, but an actual part of Xavier's life here. You look exhausted, Xavier said as they finished the evening chores. Go get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Violet made her way to the bunkhouse and Xavier returned to the main house. She lay in her new bed, staring at the ceiling, and tried to process everything that had happened. 2 days ago, she had been at the Henderson ranch, beaten down and hopeless. Now she was here, with a kind employer and a real chance at building something better. She thought about Xavier, about the way he moved and spoke, about the genuine warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. He was handsome. She could not deny that, but more importantly, he seemed to be truly good. In her experience, men like that did not exist, and yet here he was, defying her expectations at every turn. Violet knew she needed to be careful. It would be easy to develop feelings for him, easy to mistake kindness for something more. She could not afford to make that mistake. This was a job, an opportunity to finally get ahead. She needed to focus on that, on proving her worth and saving her money and building toward the future she had always wanted. But as she drifted off to sleep, she could not help thinking about the way Xavier had looked at her across the campfire, the way his hands had steadied her when she stumbled, the way he spoke to her like she mattered. And despite her best intentions, despite all her walls and defenses, she felt something small and fragile unfurling in her chest. Hope. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that was both challenging and deeply satisfying. Violet and Xavier worked on the north pasture fence every day, starting at dawn and working until mid-afternoon when the heat became too dangerous. They would break for lunch, rest during the hottest hours, then tackle smaller chores in the evening. The work was hard, but it was nothing like the Henderson ranch. Xavier kept a steady supply of cold water available, insisted they take breaks in the shade, and never criticized her for needing to rest. He worked alongside her, matching her pace rather than driving her to work faster. When she struggled with something, he showed her a better technique rather than mocking her. And slowly, gradually, Violet began to change. The constant fear that had been her companion for 5 years started to ease. She stopped flinching when Xavier moved suddenly, stopped bracing herself for criticism every time she made a mistake. Her hands began to heal, the blisters hardening into calluses that protected rather than hurt. She ate 3 solid meals a day, and color returned to her face. She slept deeply and peacefully, without the nightmares that had plagued her for years. But the most profound changes were internal. Violet found herself laughing at Xavier's dry humor, offering her own jokes in return. She began to speak up when she had ideas, knowing he would listen. She took pride in her work, not because she feared punishment if it was not perfect, but because she wanted to do well for herself and for the ranch. Xavier noticed the changes, though he rarely commented directly. Instead, he showed his approval through small gestures, an extra serving of dinner, a word of praise for a job well done, a genuine interest in her thoughts and opinions. He told her stories about his years as a drover, about the cattle drives and the men he had worked with, about the dream that had driven him to save for his own ranch. In turn, Violet found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told him about her father, about the small farm and the good years before the drought. She told him about her childhood dreams of becoming a teacher, dreams that had died along with her father. She even told him about the worst of the ranchers she had worked for, the ones who had seen her desperation and exploited it without mercy. Xavier listened to it all with focused attention, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You deserved better," he said finally. "You deserved people who would help you instead of using you. I am sorry you had to go through all that." "It does not matter now," Violet said, though his words touched something deep inside her. "I am here. This is better." "It matters," Xavier said firmly. "What happened to you matters. But you are right that you are here now, and I am going to do everything I can to make sure your future is better than your past." They were sitting on the porch of the main house that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The day's work was done, the animals were settled, and there was a peacefulness to the moment that Violet wanted to hold onto forever. "Xavier," she said quietly. Why are you not married? You have all this, a successful ranch, a good life. Most men your age already have a family." Xavier was silent for so long that Violet thought she had overstepped. Then he sighed, a sound filled with complicated emotions. "I was engaged once. Her name was Rebecca. We grew up together, planned to get married as soon as I saved enough for the ranch. But when I finally bought this place and asked her to come with me, she said no. Said she had not realized I was serious about leaving town, about living out here away from civilization. She wanted a husband with a store or a business in San Antonio, someone respectable. Not a cowboy on a patch of land in the middle of nowhere." "I am sorry," Violet said, and meant it. "I was angry for a long time," Xavier admitted. "Felt like I had wasted years working toward a future she did not want, but eventually I realized it was better that she was honest before we married. We would have been miserable together, her resenting me for bringing her here, me resenting her for not loving what I loved. Sometimes what feels like rejection is actually protection." "Do you still have feelings for her?" "No. I did for a while, but they faded. Now when I think about her, I mostly feel relieved that we did not marry. She would not have been happy here, and her unhappiness would have poisoned everything." Violet understood that more than he probably realized. She had seen marriages like that, people bound together by circumstance rather than genuine compatibility, making each other miserable year after year. "What about you?" Xavier asked. "Anyone special in your past?" Violet laughed, a sound without much humor. "No. I have been too busy surviving to think about romance, and most men who showed interest in me were not the kind of men I wanted anything to do with. They saw a desperate woman alone and thought I would be easy to take advantage of." "Their loss," Xavier said. "You are worth a lot more than they could see." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Violet felt her cheeks warm and was grateful for the gathering darkness that hid her blush. She wanted to say something, to acknowledge what he had said, but the words caught in her throat. Xavier stood, breaking the moment. "I should let you get some rest. Tomorrow we will finish that last section of fence and then we can move on to other projects." "Good night, Xavier," Violet said softly. "Good night, Violet." She watched him disappear into the house, then made her way to the bunkhouse. Her mind was spinning with thoughts she knew she should not be having. He was her employer. She was his employee. Getting involved would complicate everything, could ruin the good situation she finally had. But knowing all that did not stop her heart from beating faster when he smiled at her, did not stop her from noticing the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders when he worked, did not stop her from wanting more of these quiet evenings talking on the porch. She was falling for him, Violet realized with a mix of elation and terror. Despite all her resolutions, despite all her careful walls, Xavier Ironwood was slipping past her defenses and into her heart. The question was what, if anything, she was going to do about it. 2 months after Violet arrived at Ironwood Ranch, Xavier had to make a trip into Concordia for supplies. It was a small town, barely more than a main street with a general store, a saloon, a blacksmith, and a handful of other businesses, but it was where he did most of his trading. "You should come with me," he said to Violet over breakfast. "You have been working non-stop since you got here. A day away from the ranch will do you good." Violet's first instinct was to refuse. She did not like towns, did not like the way people looked at her, the judgment in their eyes when they saw a woman who did hard labor. But the idea of spending a day with Xavier, away from the context of work and ranch chores, was tempting. "All right," she said. "If you think you can spare me from the ranch for a day." Xavier grinned. "I think we can manage." They set out early, riding side by side through the cool morning air. Violet had gotten much better at riding over the past weeks, and Clover had become her favorite of Xavier's horses. The mare was patient and steady, and Violet felt safe on her back. Concordia came into view around mid-morning, a cluster of buildings arranged along a dusty main street. It was quiet this time of day, most people already at work or taking care of their own business. Xavier led them to the general store, a 2-story building that seemed to serve as the heart of the small community. Inside, the proprietor greeted Xavier warmly. "Mr. Ironwood, good to see you. What can I do for you today?" "Need to stock up on staples, Mr. Garrett," Xavier said. "Flour, sugar, coffee, salt, and I need to look at work gloves, good ones." Of course. Mr. Garrett's eyes shifted to Violet and she saw the curiosity there. "And who is this?" "This is Violet Ashford," Xavier said. "She works at my ranch, best hand I have ever had." The pride in his voice made Violet's chest tight. Mr. Garrett looked surprised but recovered quickly. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Ashford. Always nice to see women working alongside men in this territory. Shows strength of character." Violet warmed to him immediately. "Pleased to meet you too, sir." While Xavier discussed supplies with Mr. Garrett, Violet wandered through the store, looking at goods she could never afford. There were bolts of fabric, spools of thread, ready-made dresses on display. Tools and equipment hung from the walls. Jars of candy lined one shelf, and she found herself staring at them like a child. "Pick something," Xavier said from behind her. "My treat." "I could not, you could. You have been working hard. Let me do something nice for you." Violet bit her lip, then pointed to a jar of peppermint sticks. "I have not had peppermint in years." Xavier bought a handful of peppermint sticks along with his supplies, and when Mr. Garrett handed them to Violet, she felt ridiculously happy. Such a small thing, but it represented something larger: kindness, generosity, being cared for. They loaded the supplies into the wagon Xavier had brought and then walked down the main street together. Xavier pointed out various buildings and told her about the people who ran them. It was clear he was well liked in Concordia, respected as a hard-working rancher and a fair dealer. They had lunch at a small restaurant, and Violet was hyper-aware of the way people glanced at them, clearly speculating about their relationship. Let them wonder, she thought with a touch of defiance. She had nothing to be ashamed of. "This is nice," she said as they ate. "Thank you for bringing me." "Thank you for coming," Xavier replied. "It is good to have company. I usually make these trips alone and they can feel long." "I imagine running a ranch alone is lonely in general," Violet said carefully. "It can be," Xavier admitted. "That is one reason I wanted to hire someone permanent. Not just for the work, though that is important, but for the companionship. It is good to have someone to talk to share meals with too." He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "To what?" Violet prompted, her heart beating faster. Xavier met her eyes, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. "To build something with," he said quietly. "This ranch, it is mine, but it feels incomplete somehow, like it is waiting for something, or someone." The words hung between them, charged with possibility. Violet knew she should be cautious, should remember her place, but she could not help the hope that surged through her. "Xavier," she began, but was interrupted by a woman's voice. "Xavier Ironwood, I thought that was you." They both turned to see a well-dressed woman approaching their table. She was beautiful in a delicate way, with carefully arranged blonde hair and a dress that probably cost more than Violet made in 6 months. And the way she looked at Xavier, with a mixture of regret and calculation, told Violet exactly who this was before Xavier said her name. "Rebecca," Xavier said, his voice carefully neutral. "Good to see you." "Is it?" Rebecca's smile was brittle. "I heard you were still ranching out there. I thought surely you would have given it up by now and come back to civilization." Her eyes shifted to Violet and her expression turned condescending. "And who is this?" "Your cook." "This is Violet Ashford," Xavier said, and there was an edge to his voice now. "She works at my ranch. Violet, this is Rebecca Dalton." Violet nodded politely, though she felt the sting of Rebecca's dismissal. The other woman barely acknowledged her, turning her attention back to Xavier. "I was hoping we could talk," Rebecca said. "I have been thinking about our conversation from a few years ago, and I may have been hasty." "Perhaps we could." "No," Xavier said firmly. "Whatever you are about to suggest, the answer is no. You made your choice, Rebecca, and I made mine. I have moved on." Rebecca's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "With her?" She gestured at Violet with barely concealed contempt. "A common laborer. You could do so much better, Xavier. You deserve someone of quality, someone who understands your potential." Xavier stood so abruptly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Violet has more quality in her little finger than you have in your entire body," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "She is worth 10 of you, Rebecca, and I will not have you insulting her. We are leaving." He threw money on the table for their meal and held out his hand to Violet. She took it, standing on shaky legs, and let him lead her out of the restaurant. Behind them, she could hear the murmur of voices as other patrons reacted to the scene. They walked quickly to where the wagon was parked, and Xavier helped Violet up before climbing up himself. Neither of them spoke until they were clear of town, heading back toward the ranch. "I am sorry," Xavier said finally. "I am sorry you had to meet her, and I am sorry she spoke to you that way. You did not deserve that." "It is all right," Violet said, though her hands were shaking. "I have been looked down on before." "It is not all right," Xavier said fiercely. "And I meant what I said in there. You are worth 10 of her. You are worth more than she could ever understand." Violet looked at him, at the anger in his eyes that was not directed at her but on her behalf, at the protective set to his jaw. And she realized with crystalline clarity that she was not just falling for Xavier Ironwood. She was already in love with him. "Xavier, I am in love with you," Xavier said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I have been trying not to be, trying to keep things professional between us, but seeing her look at you that way, hearing her dismiss you like you are nothing, it made me realize I cannot keep pretending. You are everything, Violet. You are strong and brave and kind, and you make me want to build a future, not just for myself but for us. Together. Violet could not breathe, could not think, could only stare at him as her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. You do not have to say anything, Xavier continued. I know I am your employer, and that makes this complicated. I know you might not feel the same way, but I needed you to know. I needed you to understand how much you mean to me. I love you too, Violet whispered, and then louder, stronger. I love you too, Xavier. I tried not to. I tried to keep my distance, to just focus on the work. But you are so good, so genuinely good, and you make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way no one ever has before. I love you. Xavier pulled the wagon to a stop right there in the middle of the road. He turned to her, his eyes searching her face like he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Say it again. I love you, Violet said, and this time she smiled through the tears that were streaming down her face. I love you, Xavier Ironwood. He kissed her then, a kiss that was gentle and fierce all at once, a kiss that tasted like peppermint and promise. Violet wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding inside for months. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless and grinning like fools. This changes things, Xavier said, his forehead resting against hers. Yes, Violet agreed. Is that all right? It is more than all right. It is perfect. He pulled back slightly, his expression turning serious. I want to do this right, Violet. I want to court you properly, want to give you time to be sure about me, about us. I do not want you to feel pressured because I am your employer or because you feel obligated. I do not feel pressured, Violet said firmly. I feel happy. Happier than I have been in longer than I can remember, and I do not need time to be sure. I already am sure. Still, Xavier said, let me court you. Let me show you how much you mean to me. Let me prove that this is real and lasting. You have been through so much, and you deserve someone who will cherish you the way you deserve. Violet felt fresh tears spill over. You already do. You have been cherishing me since the day we met. Then let me keep doing it, Xavier said softly. Every day for the rest of our lives. They stayed there on the road for a long time, holding each other as the sun climbed higher in the sky. When they finally continued toward home, everything looked different to Violet. The landscape seemed brighter, the future more full of possibility. She was in love, and she was loved in return, and after 5 years of cruelty and hardship, she finally had something beautiful. The next few months were the happiest of Violet's life. True to his word, Xavier courted her with care and attention. He picked wildflowers for her and left them in her bunkhouse. He taught her to play checkers and let her win sometimes. He read to her in the evenings from books he treasured, sharing his love of stories. They worked together during the day and spent their evenings talking on the porch, sharing dreams and memories and hopes for the future. Xavier also insisted on paying her separately from the courtship, making it clear that her wages were for her work and had nothing to do with their relationship. I want you to have your own money, he explained. I want you to know you can stand on your own feet, that you are choosing to be with me because you want to, not because you have to. Violet saved every penny she did not absolutely need to spend, watching her small nest egg grow. It was not about wanting to leave. It was about finally having something that was hers, about knowing she had options and choices. The people of Concordia gradually got used to seeing them together, and while some still gossiped, most seemed to accept their relationship. Mr. Garrett at the general store was particularly supportive, always having a kind word for Violet when they came to town. Even Rebecca, who they heard had set her sights on a banker from San Antonio, seemed to have moved on. 6 months after that day on the road, Xavier proposed. They were working together to repair the barn roof when he suddenly stopped and looked at her with such intensity that she nearly dropped her hammer. "Marry me," he said. "I know we talked about taking time, but I have known since the day I met you that you were meant to be part of my life. Marry me, Violet. Be my wife, my partner, my everything." Violet did not hesitate. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Xavier pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the light. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing I have from her. I want you to have it." He slipped it on her finger and it fit perfectly. Violet looked at the ring, at Xavier's hopeful face, at the ranch spread out around them, and felt a contentment so profound it was almost painful. "When?" she asked. "As soon as possible. Tomorrow if we could. I have waited long enough for my life to really start." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony in Concordia, with Mr. Garrett and his wife serving as witnesses. Violet wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Xavier insisted on buying her, simple but pretty in pale blue. Xavier wore his best suit, and the way he looked at her when she walked toward him made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The minister spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through joy and hardship. And when he pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with such tenderness that Violet forgot anyone else was in the room. They celebrated with a meal at the restaurant where Rebecca had confronted them months ago, reclaiming the space with their happiness. Then they rode home to Ironwood Ranch, which was now truly theirs together. That night, Xavier carried Violet over the threshold of the main house, which she had been inside many times but never as a resident. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ironwood," he said, setting her down gently. "Mrs. Ironwood," Violet repeated, testing the name. "I like how that sounds." "I love how it sounds," Xavier corrected. "I love everything about you." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands gentle but insistent as they explored. Violet kissed him back, feeling desire unfurl in her belly. This was her husband, her partner, the man who had seen her at her lowest and offered her not just work but hope, dignity, and love. "Are you sure?" Xavier whispered against her lips. "We can wait if you want. We have all the time in the world." "I am sure," Violet said. "I have never been more sure of anything." Their wedding night was everything Violet had not known to hope for. Tender and passionate, patient and urgent, filled with laughter and sighs and whispered declarations. Xavier treated her like she was precious, like she was a gift he wanted to unwrap carefully. And when they finally came together, Violet felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, skin against skin, heartbeat against heartbeat. Xavier traced lazy patterns on her back, and Violet pressed her face to his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me when I was invisible. For treating me like I mattered when everyone else treated me like garbage. For loving me when I had forgotten how to love myself." Xavier tilted her face up to his and kissed her forehead. "Thank you for being brave enough to trust me. Thank you for working so hard to build this life with me. Thank you for loving me back. Always," Violet promised. "I will always love you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and for the first time in 5 years, Violet slept without any shadows haunting her dreams. The years that followed were good ones. Violet and Xavier worked the ranch together, expanding the herd and improving the land. They hired additional help during busy seasons, but the core work was theirs, done side by side as partners. Violet had a gift for managing cattle, a calm patience that made even the most stubborn animals respond to her. Xavier handled more of the business side, though he consulted Violet on every major decision. They became fixtures in Concordia, known as the hard-working couple from Ironwood Ranch. Violet joined the local women's group and was surprised to find genuine friendships there, women who valued her for who she was rather than judging her for her past. Xavier served on the town council, working to improve conditions for everyone in the area. 2 years into their marriage, Violet discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier over dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. What she saw there was pure, undiluted joy. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Violet asked, though she could see that he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xavier said. He came around the table and knelt beside her chair, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "You have given me so much already, and now this. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God for you every day." The pregnancy was not easy. Violet struggled with sickness in the early months and exhaustion throughout. Xavier was endlessly patient, taking on extra work so she could rest, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her aching back at the end of long days. He worried constantly, afraid something would go wrong, and Violet had to reassure him repeatedly that she was fine, that women had been having babies since the beginning of time. Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1879, after a labor that lasted 12 hours and left Violet exhausted but exhilarated. Xavier, who had been pacing holes in the floor, burst into tears when he saw the baby for the first time. They named him Samuel after Xavier's father, and from the moment he entered the world, he owned both their hearts completely. Watching Xavier with Samuel was a revelation. He was so gentle, so patient, so completely devoted. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with their son during the night, sang off key lullabies that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. And when Samuel smiled at him for the first time, Xavier looked at Violet with such wonder that she fell in love with him all over again. "I never knew," he said softly, holding their son against his chest. "I never knew I could feel like this, like my heart is walking around outside my body." "Now you know," Violet said, reaching out to stroke Samuel's downy head. "Now you know what it is to love someone more than yourself." Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting and absolutely wonderful. Violet had worried she would not know how to be a mother, having lost her own mother so young, but she found that instinct and love carried her through. She nursed Samuel in the rocking chair Xavier had made for her, singing songs her father had sung to her. She watched him grow and change with amazement, marveling at how quickly he developed from a tiny bundle into a person with his own personality. When Samuel was 2, Violet became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect. Their daughter Lily was born in the summer of 1881, a tiny thing with dark curls and her father's eyes. Samuel, now old enough to understand he was a big brother, took his role seriously, constantly wanting to help care for his baby. The ranch prospered as their family grew. They added a proper second story to the house, creating bedrooms for the children and more space for all of them. Xavier hired 2 permanent ranch hands, good men who treated Violet with respect and worked hard. The cattle herd grew to nearly 500 head, and they became known throughout the region for quality stock. But more than the material success, it was the small moments that made Violet's life rich. Sunday mornings when they would all pile into Xavier's lap for stories. Summer evenings when Samuel and Lily would chase fireflies while she and Xavier watched from the porch. Winter nights when they would all huddle by the fire, safe and warm and together. "You remember the day we met?" Xavier asked one evening when the children were asleep, and they had the porch to themselves again. "Every detail," Violet said. "You rode up to the Henderson place like something out of a dream. I thought you could not be real, that someone so kind could not possibly exist." "I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen," Xavier said. "Working yourself to death for people who did not deserve your labor and still holding your head high. I knew right then I wanted you in my life. I did not know yet that I wanted you as my wife, but I knew I could not walk away and leave you there." "Best decision you ever made," Violet teased. "Best decision I ever made," Xavier confirmed seriously. "Everything good in my life traces back to that day. This ranch was just a place before you. Now it is a home. You and the children, you are what make it matter." Violet leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, breathing in the familiar scent of him. "I was so broken when you found me. I had given up on ever being happy, on ever being more than a beast of burden for cruel men. You did not just give me a job, Xavier. You gave me back my life. You gave me back myself." "You were never broken," Xavier said firmly. "You were bent, maybe, hurt, but not broken. The strength was always there, the goodness, the capability. I just gave you a place where those things could flourish instead of being crushed." They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. After all these years, Violet sometimes still could not believe this was her life. That she had gone from the Henderson ranch, from that place of misery and desperation, to this. A beautiful home, healthy children, a husband who loved her with his whole heart. "What are you thinking?" Xavier asked, clearly sensing her mood. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, how different everything could have been if you had not ridden up that day. I was so close to the edge, Xavier. A few more months with Henderson and I think something in me would have broken for good. You saved me." "We saved each other," Xavier corrected. "This ranch, these dreams, they were empty before you. You filled them with meaning, with purpose. You made me understand what it means to build something that matters. We saved each other, Violet. And we will keep saving each other every day for the rest of our lives." It was a promise he kept. Through good years and lean years, through the challenges of raising children and running a ranch, through the normal trials of any long marriage, they kept choosing each other. Kept working together, laughing together, growing together. When Samuel was 10 and Lily was 8, Violet realized she was pregnant again. At 37, she had thought her childbearing years were behind her, and the news was both surprising and welcome. Xavier was ecstatic, though also more protective than ever, hovering over her like she might break. Their third child, a boy they named Thomas, was born without complications in the spring of 1889. Samuel and Lily, both old enough to be real helpers now, doted on their baby brother. And Violet, looking at her 3 children and her silver-haired husband who was somehow even more handsome at 39 than he had been at 26, felt a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. "What if it does not last?" she whispered to Xavier one night. "What if something happens? What if I wake up tomorrow and this has all been a dream?" Xavier pulled her close. "Then we will face it together, the way we have faced everything. But Violet, this is real. This life we have built, this family, this love, it is all real and solid and not going anywhere. You can trust in it. You can trust in us." And she did. She trusted in the strength of their partnership, in the foundation they had built together. She trusted in their love, which had only deepened and matured over the years. She trusted in the future they were creating, not just for themselves but for their children. The children grew, each developing their own personalities and interests. Samuel loved the cattle and the outdoor work, following Xavier everywhere and learning the ranching business from the ground up. Lily was fascinated by the domestic arts, but also had a head for numbers. helping her mother with the ranch accounts and showing early promise as a businesswoman. Thomas, the baby, was curious about everything, constantly asking questions and exploring every corner of the ranch. As the 1890s began, Violet and Xavier were in their 40s, still vital and active but starting to think about the future in new ways. They talked about what would happen to the ranch when they were gone, about how to divide it fairly among the children, or whether one of them should inherit it whole. They talked about expanding further or staying at their current comfortable size. They talked about taking a trip, just the two of them, to see parts of the country they had never visited. But mostly, they just lived. They woke up each morning grateful for another day together. They worked hard and played with their children. They made love with the easy familiarity of long partnership. They grew old together, slowly and contentedly, watching silver threads appear in their hair and lines deepen on their faces. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Violet on a picnic to the spot where he had first told her he loved her, that place on the road where everything had changed. The children were old enough to manage the ranch for an afternoon, and it was just the two of them, a basket of food and a blanket spread on the grass. 20 years, Violet said wonderingly. It has gone so fast. And so slow, Xavier countered. I remember every day, every moment. The good ones and the hard ones, all of it matters. Do you have any regrets? Violet asked. Xavier considered the question seriously. I regret that I could not find you sooner. I regret all the years you suffered before we met. But as for our life together, our marriage, our family, not a single regret, not one. Neither do I, Violet said. You gave me everything, Xavier, not just material things, though those matter too, but you gave me dignity and respect and love. You showed me I was worth caring about. You mended my broken spirit and helped me become whole again. And you gave me purpose, Xavier said. You turned this ranch from a business into a home. You gave me children and partnership and a reason to build something lasting. We mended each other, Violet. That is what love does. It heals the broken places. They lay back on the blanket, looking up at the sky, hands clasped between them. 20 years of marriage, of working together and building together and loving together. 20 years of choosing each other every day. It was not always easy, was not always perfect, but it was real and true and theirs. To 20 more, Violet said softly. To forever, Xavier replied. However long we have, I want to spend it with you. The years continued their steady march forward. Samuel, at 21, announced his intention to marry a sweet young woman from Concordia named Margaret. Violet helped plan the wedding, remembering her own simple ceremony and making sure Samuel and Margaret had something more elaborate if they wanted it. The wedding was beautiful, held at the ranch with half of Concordia in attendance, and when Violet saw the way Samuel looked at his bride, she saw an echo of how Xavier had looked at her all those years ago. Lily, at 19, surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to go to business school in San Antonio. It was unusual for a woman, but Xavier and Violet had raised their children to pursue their dreams. They helped her find a reputable boarding house and made sure she had everything she needed. It was hard to watch her go, but they were proud of her courage and determination. Thomas, still young at 12, remained at home, the last child in a house that had once been full of noise and chaos. He thrived on the extra attention, learning from both his parents and developing into a thoughtful, capable young man. Samuel and Margaret built a house on the far edge of the ranch property and started their own herd. Within a year, they had given Violet and Xavier their first grandchild, a boy named Peter. Holding her grandson for the first time, Violet felt the circle of life complete in a way that was both humbling and profound. You are a grandmother now, Xavier teased, though his own eyes were misty as he looked at the baby. "And you are a grandfather," Violet replied. "Old man. Old man who still loves you more than anything," Xavier said, kissing her temple. "That will never change, no matter how many grandchildren we have." And there were more grandchildren. Samuel and Margaret had 3 children in total. Lily, who eventually returned from business school with a husband of her own, a banker she had met in San Antonio, settled in Concordia and had 2 daughters. Thomas, when he grew up, married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property and brought his bride to live at the main ranch, helping his aging parents run the operation. By the time Violet and Xavier reached their 60s, Ironwood Ranch was a thriving multi-generational enterprise. The original 500 acres had grown to nearly 1,000. The cattle numbered in the high hundreds, and the family had become one of the most respected in the region. But for Violet and Xavier, the greatest wealth was not measured in acres or cattle. It was measured in family dinners with children and grandchildren crowding the table. It was measured in the way their sons and daughters still sought their advice and valued their wisdom. It was measured in knowing they had built something that would outlast them, something good and strong and true. They still sat on the porch most evenings, though now their movements were slower, their bodies bearing the accumulated aches of decades of hard work. Xavier's dark hair had gone completely silver, and Violet's hands were gnarled with arthritis. But the love between them had not diminished. If anything, it had grown richer, deeper, seasoned by time and trials overcome together. "Tell me again," Xavier said one evening, his voice soft in the growing darkness. "Tell you what?" Violet asked, though she knew what he wanted. "Tell me you love me. I never get tired of hearing it." "I love you, Xavier Ironwood," Violet said, the words as true and powerful as they had been the first time she had spoken them. "I have loved you since the day you saw me as a person instead of a problem. I loved you when we were young and strong. I love you now that we are old and tired. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." Xavier took her hand, the one that still wore his mother's ring after all these years. "I love you, Violet Ironwood. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, the very best thing." They sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch around them. Cattle lowing in the distance, horses moving in their stalls, voices of family members somewhere in the house. This life they had built together, this legacy they would leave behind, it was everything Violet had never dared to dream of during those dark years before Xavier. She thought sometimes about the girl she had been, broken and desperate and working herself to death for cruel employers. She thought about Marcus Henderson and all the others who had treated her as less than human. And she was grateful for those experiences, not because they had been good, but because they had taught her to recognize and appreciate true kindness when it finally came. Xavier had not just hired her. He had seen her, really seen her, when she was at her lowest. He had offered her not just work but dignity, not just wages but respect. He had loved her when she could not love herself, had believed in her when she had lost all faith. He had mended her broken spirit, piece by careful piece, with patience and gentleness and unwavering commitment. And in return, she had given him everything she was and everything she had. She had worked beside him to build something lasting. She had given him children and partnership and a home filled with love. She had chosen him every day for over 40 years, through good times and difficult times, through youth and middle age and now into their twilight years. It was a love story for the ages, she thought. Not the dramatic kind with grand gestures and sweeping declarations, but the quiet, steady kind that endured. The kind built on mutual respect and shared labor, on commitment renewed daily, on choosing each other again and again. What are you thinking about? Xavier asked, squeezing her hand gently. "I am thinking about how far we have come, how much we have built together, how lucky I am that you rode up to the Henderson ranch that day." "I am the lucky one," Xavier insisted. "You could have said no. You could have decided I was just another man looking to use you, but you trusted me, gave me a chance. That was the real gift." "We were both lucky," Violet compromised. "We found each other when we both needed finding, and we built something beautiful together." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out, until someone called them in for dinner, until their old bodies could no longer tolerate the evening chill. They went inside together, still holding hands, still moving as one after all these years. That night, lying in the bed they had shared for decades, Violet listened to Xavier's breathing even out into sleep. She thought about all the nights they had spent like this, all the mornings they had woken up together, all the days they had worked and laughed and loved side by side. She thought about the life she had now compared to the life she had been living when they met. The contrast was so stark it almost did not seem real. But it was real, all of it, built on the foundation of one man's kindness and one woman's courage to accept that kindness. Violet Ironwood fell asleep that night, as she had every night for over 40 years, safe in the knowledge that she was loved. Loved completely, fiercely, eternally by a man who had seen her worth when the world had told her she had none. A man who had mended fences for a living, but had mended her broken spirit instead. And that, she thought as sleep claimed her, was the greatest gift of all. Not the ranch or the wealth or the children or grandchildren, precious as they all were, but the simple, profound knowledge that she was worthy of love, worthy of respect, worthy of a good life. Xavier had given her that knowledge, had shown her through actions and words repeated across decades that she mattered, that she had value, that she deserved happiness. It was a lesson she had carried with her ever since, a truth that had transformed her from a desperate, broken young woman into a confident, capable matriarch. And it was a lesson she had passed on to her children and would pass on to her grandchildren. That every person has intrinsic worth, that kindness matters, that love is the most powerful force in the world. The years continued to pass, as they always do. Violet and Xavier grew older, moving from their 60s into their 70s. Their bodies slowed further, their steps becoming more careful, their energy more limited. But their spirits remained strong and their love for each other never wavered. On a warm spring morning in 1912, Xavier woke to find Violet still asleep beside him. For a moment, he just watched her, this woman who had been the center of his world for almost 4 decades. Her hair was white now, her face lined with the marks of laughter and hard work, but to him, she was still the beautiful young woman he had fallen in love with. "Good morning, my love," he whispered, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Violet's eyes fluttered open and she smiled at him with the same warmth she had shown him every morning of their marriage. "Good morning. Have you been watching me sleep? Just appreciating how lucky I am," Xavier admitted. 52 years we have known each other, 46 years married. And I am still not tired of waking up next to you. Only 52 more years to go then, Violet joked, though they both knew their time was growing shorter. They were 72 and 76 respectively, ages many people never reached, especially in this hard country. They rose slowly, helping each other as they had learned to do. Their children had urged them to slow down, to let the younger generation handle the ranch completely, but Violet and Xavier were not ready to be idle. They still did light chores, still walked the property together, still felt most themselves when they were working the land they loved. That morning, after breakfast with Thomas and his wife who lived with them now, Xavier suggested they take a walk out to the north pasture, the place where Violet had done her first work for him all those decades ago. "That fence is still standing," he said with pride. "The one we built together that first month. We did good work." They walked slowly, arm in arm, taking their time. The ranch spread around them, lush and green from spring rains. Cattle grazed peacefully. In the distance, they could see some of their grandchildren working, the youngest generation learning the trade. "We did good work in more ways than one," Violet said, gesturing at the scene around them. "Look at all this, Xavier. Look at what we built. Not just the ranch, but the family, the legacy. All these people who exist because we found each other." "Best work I ever did," Xavier agreed. "Everything else was just practice for loving you." They reached the old fence line and Xavier ran his hand along the weathered wood. "Do you remember how scared you were that first day? How you could barely look me in the eye?" "I remember," Violet said. "I remember thinking you were too good to be true, that something had to go wrong. I had forgotten what it felt like to be treated with basic decency. And now I know that goodness is real, that love is real, that it is possible to move from the worst of circumstances to the best of lives, if you have courage and someone who believes in you." They stood together in the spring sunshine, two old people who had loved each other longer than many people lived. Around them, the ranch they had built together hummed with life and activity. Behind them lay almost half a century of shared history, of joys and sorrows, of children raised and grandchildren cherished, of hard work and sweet rewards. "No regrets?" Xavier asked, a question he had asked her periodically throughout their marriage. "Not a single one," Violet replied, the answer she always gave because it was always true. "You. Only that we will not have another 50 years together, but I will take whatever time we have left and be grateful for every minute." They made their way back to the house as the sun climbed higher, still arm in arm, still moving as one. The years ahead would bring changes, would bring losses and challenges as all years do. But they would face those years together, as they had faced everything together since that day in 1876, when a cowboy rode up to a broken young woman and offered her a chance at something better. Xavier Ironwood had been looking for someone to help him mend fences. Instead, he had found the love of his life. He had mended Violet's broken spirit, had shown her that she was worthy of respect and dignity and love. And in return, she had given him a life rich with meaning and purpose, had filled his home and heart with laughter and love. It was, Violet thought as they climbed the porch steps together, the greatest romance she could have ever imagined. Not because it was easy or perfect, but because it was real. Because two people had chosen each other every day for decades, had built something lasting through commitment and care, had proven that love was more than a feeling. It was a choice, a promise, an action repeated over and over until it became the very foundation of their lives. She looked at Xavier, at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude and love. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For everything. For seeing me, for choosing me, for loving me, for giving me this life." Xavier cupped her face in his weathered hands and kissed her with the tenderness of long practice. "Thank you for letting me. Thank you for saying yes to that first job offer. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for loving me back. You made my life complete, Violet. Everything good traces back to you." They went inside together, ready to face whatever the day would bring, secure in the knowledge that they had each other. They had weathered 46 years of marriage and would weather however many more they were granted. Because they were not just husband and wife, not just partners in running a ranch. They were two halves of one whole, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. And as they sat down to lunch with their family, Surrounded by children and grandchildren and the fruits of their decades of labor, Violet Ashford Ironwood knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. That cruel employers and broken spirits were things of the past. That she had been mended, healed, made whole by love and work and the unwavering devotion of a good man. It was everything she had never known to hope for, and it was real. It was hers. It was the happy ending she had earned through courage and perseverance, the reward for saying yes when a cowboy offered her something better, the gift of a life well lived, and a love that would endure beyond the boundaries of time.